Washington, D.C. occupies a planned site along the Potomac River. Selected in 1790 as a compromise location for the nation's capital. The city's position between Maryland and Virginia placed it at the geographic midpoint of the original 13 states. The landscape consisted of marshland, low hills, and existing settlements, including the port town of Georgetown. This terrain, combined with the decision to create a purpose-built capital rather than adopt an existing city, established the conditions for a distinct approach to urban design. The initial plan, completed in 1791, organized the city around a grid of streets intersected by diagonal avenues. This layout reflected European traditions of Baroque planning, emphasizing broad vistas and ceremonial spaces. The earliest federal buildings employed neoclassical design, drawing directly from Greek and Roman precedents. Construction materials came from regional sources: sandstone from Virginia, brick from local kilns, and timber from surrounding forests. Building proceeded slowly during the early decades. With much of the city remaining undeveloped well into the 19th century, the Civil War period marked a significant shift in the city's growth and building patterns. The population increased substantially as the federal workforce expanded and formerly enslaved people arrived seeking refuge and opportunity. Residential construction accelerated, particularly in areas east of the capital and north of the original city boundaries. Row houses became the dominant building type for middle-class housing, constructed in brick with modest ornamental detail. These structures formed cohesive streetscapes that remain characteristic of many neighborhoods today. The late 19th century brought industrialization and new construction technologies to the capital. The introduction of steel framing, electric elevators, and improved foundation techniques enabled taller buildings. Though height restrictions implemented in the early 20th century prevented the development of skyscrapers common in other American cities, the Romanesque revival style appeared in numerous civic and commercial buildings during this period, characterized by rough-cut stone, arched openings, and heavy massing. Beaux-Arts classicism also gained prominence, particularly for government buildings and cultural institutions, emphasizing symmetry, classical orders, and elaborate sculptural programs. Transportation infrastructure fundamentally altered the city's spatial organization. Horse-drawn streetcar lines in the mid-19th century extended settlement beyond the original boundaries. Electric streetcars, introduced in the 1880s, accelerated suburban development along radial corridors. Residential neighborhoods emerged in previously rural areas, featuring detached houses with yards rather than the dense row house blocks of the older city. The rail connections also influenced commercial patterns, concentrating retail and office activities near its major transit nodes. The early 20th century saw comprehensive efforts to reshape the city's monumental core. Planning initiatives emphasized the original vision of grand avenues and ceremonial spaces, clearing structures that had accumulated haphazardly over previous decades. New federal buildings adopted a restrained neoclassical vocabulary, using limestone and granite instead of the sandstone and brick of earlier periods. This architectural consistency created a unified character for the government district, distinguishing it from the varied styles of residential and commercial areas. World War I and the economic expansion of the 1920s accelerated construction throughout the city. Office buildings, serving government agencies, and private firms increased in number and scale. Art Deco influences appeared in commercial architecture, introducing geometric ornament, vertical emphasis, and modern materials such as terracotta and aluminum. Residential development continued outward, with automobile ownership enabling settlement in areas beyond streetcar lines. Building types diversified to include apartment buildings. Reflecting changing household patterns and urban density, the Depression years slowed private construction but increased government building activity. Federal projects provided employment while expanding the capital's infrastructure and institutional presence. Architectural expression during this period tended toward simplified classical forms, often called stripped classicism, which retained traditional proportions and symmetry while eliminating decorative detail. This approach represented an economical adaptation of established architectural language rather than a fundamental stylistic departure. Post-World War II development brought substantial changes to the city's built environment. Modernist architecture appeared in new government offices, cultural buildings, and private developments. These structures employed concrete, glass, and steel in compositions, emphasizing horizontal lines, modular repetition, and unadorned surfaces. Urban renewal projects demolished older neighborhoods, particularly those inhabited by African American communities, replacing them with superblocks, highways, and institutional complexes. This approach to planning prioritized automobile circulation and separated uses rather than preserving traditional street patterns and mixed-use development. The 1960s and 1970s witnessed growing attention to historic preservation as a counterbalance to modernist redevelopment. Legislation protected individual landmarks and entire historic districts, recognizing that the accumulated architectural fabric held cultural and historical value beyond the significance of isolated monuments. Preservation efforts focused initially on areas associated with federal history and affluent neighborhoods, later expanding to encompass more diverse building types and communities. This shift influenced subsequent construction, encouraging contextual design that responded to existing architectural character rather than imposing entirely new formal systems. Late 20th century architecture in Washington reflected broader national trends while maintaining local building regulations. Postmodern design reintroduced historical references and decorative elements after decades of minimalist modernism. Height restrictions and zoning requirements continued to shape development patterns, preventing dramatic vertical expansion while encouraging horizontal spread into surrounding jurisdictions. Office construction concentrated in specific districts, creating concentrated business centers, distinct from residential neighborhoods and the monumental core. The city's architectural character remains defined by the interplay between planned intentions and incremental development, between monumental public buildings and ordinary residential structures, between preservation and change. The neoclassical government buildings maintain their prominence, limestone facades reflecting the ideals of their construction era. Row house neighborhoods preserve 19th century urban patterns, their brick streetscapes recording earlier phases of growth. Modernist and contemporary buildings coexist with these older layers, contributing to the city's evolving architectural identity without erasing what preceded them.